Everyone thought this hearing would be predictable until Jasmine Crockett opened her mouth. The courtroom was supposed to be calm that morning, one of those predictable, routine hearings where everyone already knows what's going to happen long before the judge even sits down. The kind of morning where lawyers shuffle papers without urgency, reporters scroll through their phones, and the audience waits without expecting much. But the moment Representative Jasmine Crockett pushed open those heavy oak doors, everything shifted. It was instant. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Pens froze above notepads. A ripple moved through the room like a silent electric shock. People whispered her name under their breath. Reporters sat up straight, suddenly alert. Even the attorneys, who had walked in earlier with bored confidence, pulled their jackets tight and stood a little taller. Because whenever Jasmine Crockett walked into a room, she didn't bring ordinary energy. She brought presence, commanding, sharp, and undeniable. Crockett wasn't the type to show up unless she had something worth fighting for. And when she fought, she didn't just make arguments, she made moments. Moments that stuck to people's minds long after the camera stopped rolling. Today would be no different. In fact, today she was prepared for a showdown nobody had predicted, not even Justice William Alsup himself. Alsup, known across legal circles for his clever jabs and razor-sharp reasoning, had a reputation. If he didn't like your argument, he would let you know, sometimes with a smirk, sometimes with sarcasm, and sometimes with open laughter. But Crockett wasn't intimidated, not even a little. She walked down the center aisle with steady steps, her heels echoing across the polished floors, each one sounding like a countdown to something bigger. She placed her binder gently on the podium, calm, precise, ready. Justice Alsup glanced up. For a moment, their eyes met. He didn't know it yet, but this would be the hearing people would talk about for weeks. This wouldn't be a routine proceeding. This wouldn't be business as usual. This would be the moment, the one that would start with a judge's dismissive laughter and end with a silence so powerful the courtroom would remember it long after the doors closed behind them. Because today, Jasmine Crockett wasn't here to participate. She was here to take control. Crockett stepped up to the podium, notes in hand, eyes sharp and steady, eyes that spoke of preparation, confidence, and a quiet, deadly kind of determination. The kind of look that tells a courtroom, I didn't just come ready, I came expecting a fight. She cleared her throat gently, lifted her first page, and began. Your Honor, she said, voice firm but respectful, the legal framework being used in this case is outdated, inconsistent, and... But she didn't finish the sentence. Because Justice William Alsup suddenly leaned back in his chair, tilted his head, and let out a short, unmistakable laugh. A laugh. It wasn't loud, it wasn't long, but it was enough. Enough to cut the air. Enough to send a shockwave through the room. Gasps rippled across the benches. A few people looked at each other, eyes wide. Even reporters, who lived for drama, seemed startled. Crockett froze for a moment, then slowly lifted her eyes from her notes. The room tightened with tension, the kind that squeezes breaths out of lungs, the kind that turns a silent courtroom into a pressure cooker. Justice Alsup shook his head with amusement. Counselor, he said, tapping his pen on the bench, this legal theory of yours sounds more like wishful thinking than a legitimate constitutional argument. Even the court stenographer, trained to stay expressionless no matter what, hesitated mid-typing. It was subtle, but people noticed. Because here's one thing everyone in Washington knew. No one, absolutely no one, laughed at Jasmine Crockett and got away with it. But instead of snapping back or showing any sign of irritation, Crockett did something so unexpected that it shifted the energy of the entire room. She smiled. A calm, controlled, almost serene smile. A smile that said, "You have no idea what's coming next." Even the bailiff, who had seen years of drama in this courtroom, raised an eyebrow. Then Crockett spoke, voice smooth as steel. "Your Honor, if I may continue." Alsup, still wearing that faint smirk, waved his hand. "Proceed," he said lightly. "I could use a good argument to go along with the entertainment." A low murmur spread through the audience. Reporters leaned forward. Cameras clicked and flashed like fireworks. Because in that moment, everyone knew. This was no longer a routine hearing. This was a turning point, a collision. A moment where a judge underestimated a woman who never came unprepared. And Crockett? She was about to flip the entire room upside down. Crockett didn't shuffle through her notes. She didn't flip a page. Instead, she placed every paper down, slowly, deliberately, as if to say, "I don't need anything written to win this." Then she raised her head, looked directly at Justice Alsup, and spoke with a calm force that instantly silenced the back row. "Your Honor," she began, her voice steady and resonant, "the Constitution has never evolved by staying comfortable. Every major legal doctrine we rely on today began as a theory someone laughed at." That one line sent a wave through the courtroom. People shifted in their seats. Reporters lifted their cameras higher. Even the murmurs died off, replaced by a heavy, expectant quiet. Crockett didn't break eye contact with the judge. She lifted her hand and counted off finger by finger. Brown v. Board? Laughed at. Opponent said equality in schools was unrealistic, disruptive, even impossible. Next finger. Miranda rights? Mocked. Critics claimed they would destroy policing before they became the backbone of criminal justice. Another finger. Same-sex marriage protections? Ridiculed before they were validated. Courts rejected the arguments for decades before finally recognizing them as fundamental rights. Each example hit harder than the last. Crockett stepped closer to the bench, measured, confident, fearless. Her heels echoed with purpose across the marble floor. "And today," she continued, eyes locked onto Alsup, "you can laugh at this theory. You can dismiss it with a smirk, but the evidence, the precedent, and the constitutional logic support it, line by line, case by case." Justice Alsup's smirk didn't disappear instantly, but it flickered, just a slight tightening around the eyes, a small shift in posture. The first crack in his earlier confidence. Crockett saw it. Everyone saw it. Her voice deepened, gaining strength. "You said my argument sounds like wishful thinking, but the only reason justice evolves is because someone dares to imagine something better than the status quo." A silence spread, thick, heavy, electric. Even the judge, who had moments ago been laughing, now leaned forward. Not out of arrogance, not out of irritation, but curiosity. Crockett reached down, picked up a single sheet of paper, and held it up. "You want legal grounding?" she asked calmly. "Here it is. And not from politicians, from the courts you yourself have cited in previous rulings." She handed the document to the clerk with a quiet confidence that echoed louder than any argument she had made so far. "And if those rulings are good enough for this court," she concluded, "then they are good enough to prove you should be taking this theory seriously." A shift moved across the room, subtle but undeniable. Justice Alsup wasn't laughing anymore. The judge reviewed the document with slow, deliberate movements, his earlier amusement completely gone. No smirk, no raised eyebrow, no trace of the man who had chuckled at her argument just minutes before. The courtroom was so silent that the faint rustle of paper sounded like thunder. Every pair of eyes in the room stayed fixed on him. Reporters gripping their pens, attorneys leaning forward, spectators barely breathing. Even the clerk seemed frozen, waiting for his reaction. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Justice Alsup lowered the document and spoke. "I see you came prepared, Representative Crockett." His tone wasn't sarcastic. It wasn't irritated. It was impressed. Crockett gave a small nod, calm and steady. "I always do, Your Honor." Alsup tapped his pen against the bench, each tap echoing across the marble floor. "You're asking this court," he said slowly, "to reinterpret a precedent that has stood for decades." Crockett didn't hesitate. "I'm asking this court," she replied, "to stop hiding behind outdated interpretations simply because they're comfortable." A ripple of whisper swept across the audience. Some leaned back in shock, others leaned forward in excitement. Crockett wasn't raising her voice. She wasn't arguing emotionally. She was being precise, surgically dismantling assumptions with each sentence. Justice Alsup raised an eyebrow, studying her. "Counselor," he asked, "are you implying this court is afraid of progress?" Crockett didn't blink. "Not afraid," she answered, "just accustomed to it arriving late." That line hit the room like a lightning strike. A couple reporters nearly dropped their phones scrambling to capture it. A few spectators exchanged stunned looks. Even one of the attorneys whispered, "Wow." Justice Alsup leaned back in his chair, his gaze never leaving Crockett. The playful arrogance that had appeared earlier was gone, completely erased. What replaced it was unmistakable: respect. Not the casual, polite kind, the real kind. The kind that only appears when someone forces you to rethink everything you assumed. "Very well," Alsup said at last. "Continue your argument." Those words carried weight, far more than anyone expected. Because in that moment, the entire courtroom realized something monumental. Jasmine Crockett had turned laughter into consideration, mockery into dialogue, dismissal into opportunity. And Justice Alsup was now taking her seriously, fully, completely, undeniably. Crockett finished her argument with a level of clarity, passion, and airtight logic that felt less like a closing statement and more like a seismic shift. She wasn't just reciting case law or legal theory, she was channeling conviction. Every sentence carried weight. Every pause drew the room closer. Every word was chosen with razor precision. You could feel the courtroom leaning in, not because they had to, but because they wanted to hear what came next. By the time she placed her final document back into her binder and gently closed it, the energy in the room had transformed. She had walked in as an advocate, but she stood there now as something far more powerful, a force the court could not ignore. Justice Alsup shifted in his chair. No trace of humor, no trace of the dismissive smirk from earlier. He cleared his throat, a small sound, but in the thick silence of the courtroom it echoed like a drum. "Representative Crockett," he said at last, his voice slower, more deliberate, "your theory, while unconventional, raises substantial constitutional questions." The courtroom reacted instantly. Whispers exploded across the benches. Reporters' heads snapped up. Phones lifted. Pens flew across notepads. Substantial. It didn't matter that he wasn't ruling yet. It didn't matter that the case was far from over. That one word was everything. For a legal mind, substantial wasn't just a term. It was validation, acknowledgement, a recognition that her argument wasn't fantasy. It was legitimate, serious, and deserving of the court's full consideration. Crockett didn't gloat. She didn't smile too wide or nod too quickly. She kept her composure, her voice steady. "Thank you, Your Honor." Justice Alsup adjusted his glasses and exhaled. "And for the record," he said, pausing long enough for every camera in the room to focus, "I shouldn't have laughed." A collective gasp floated through the courtroom. That was it, the moment that would explode on social media within minutes. In that single sentence, everything became clear. Jasmine Crockett didn't just present a legal theory. She commanded respect from a judge who had tried to brush her aside. She turned laughter into silence. She turned doubt into recognition. She turned mockery into momentum. And when she walked out of that courtroom, Chin high, step steady, eyes forward, she didn't just look confident, she looked victorious. The kind of victory that doesn't come from being accepted. The kind of victory that comes from refusing to back down, even when the first thing you hear is laughter. If this courtroom moment taught us anything, it's this. Never underestimate the power of preparation, purpose, and a woman who refuses to be dismissed.